It was supposed to be a fresh start, a dream home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of place where I imagined we could put down roots, live peacefully, and enjoy life without the usual chaos. I never thought that this peaceful home would soon become the epicenter of a nightmare that I never saw coming. It all started with a letter from the Homeowners Association, HOA, a name I hadn't heard much about until that day. The letter was filled with official-sounding jargon, full of rules that felt more like threats than guidelines. It was a joke, or so I thought at the time. The letter wasn't the problem. It was the way the HOA seemed to keep showing up. At first, they were polite, but it didn't take long for the tone to shift. They told us we needed to comply with their rules, which at first glance didn't seem like much. But after a few encounters, things started to escalate. My wife, Maria, and I thought we could ignore it, but we were wrong. They kept pressing. They kept pushing, and the more they pushed, the more I realized something wasn't right. I didn't know it yet, but they had their sights set on us. And soon, they'd target my wife. What started as harmless complaints about our lawn quickly spiraled into something more sinister. One morning, as I was sipping my coffee on the porch, I saw her, the HOA president, a woman named Karen, driving up our driveway in her spotless white SUV. She parked, got out, and walked toward me with that fake smile she always wore. I tried to brush it off, but deep down, I could feel something wasn't right. Her eyes never left me as she came closer. "I'm Karen Simmons," she said, her voice sweet, almost too sweet. "I'm the president of the Simmons Valley HOA. Just here to check on your property." I frowned. "For what?" "We have rules here," she said, flipping through a binder like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Regulations about everything. Landscaping, fencing, even noise levels. You're required to follow them." "Listen," I said, my patience starting to wear thin. "I've lived in plenty of places. This is a rural area. I don't need anyone telling me how to run my property." Her smile didn't waver. "We're all about maintaining community standards. We can help you with that." She handed me a packet. More rules, more forms. "I'm sure we'll get along just fine. You'll see. The community will be better for it." But the packet didn't stay in my hands for long. I threw it into the fire pit, watching as it burned to ash. I didn't care about the HOA. I didn't care about their so-called rules. This was my land, and I wasn't about to let anyone push me around. Little did I know, that moment of defiance would ignite something far bigger than I had ever imagined. It wasn't long before they came again. But this time, it wasn't Karen. It was two men dressed in khakis and vests, walking around my property with clipboards, making notes. They didn't even look at me when I approached. I stood there for a moment, watching them, but the silence between us grew thick. "What's going on here?" I asked. "We're conducting a compliance check," one of them said, his voice stiff and rehearsed. "On my property?" I replied, stepping closer. "Who authorized this?" He paused for a second before handing me a sheet of paper. "We're under HOA protocols." "Who are you people?" I demanded. The man seemed to hesitate, and I could see the nerves in his eyes. "Just following orders," he said, almost apologetically. I wasn't buying it. I looked at the paper. It was full of fake regulations, fake codes, nothing that meant anything to me. I knew something was off. They weren't just enforcing HOA rules. They were targeting us, trying to control us. That's when I realized they weren't just neighbors following rules. They were part of something much bigger, and they were about to make a move that would change everything. It wasn't long after that when they went after Maria. They didn't just want compliance. They wanted power, and my wife was their next target. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know what she was capable of. But they were about to find out the hard way. Maria wasn't just a housewife. She wasn't just some ordinary woman. Maria was a retired special unit officer, trained for situations like this, ready for whatever came her way. She didn't take threats lightly, but they didn't know that. They had no idea who they were messing with as the days went by. The pressure from the HOA didn't let up. They started coming more frequently, each time bringing more force, more people, more rules. My frustration grew, but Maria remained calm, observing everything with a quiet intensity that only those with real experience can have. She could see through the facade of their so-called regulations, their threats, their control tactics. They were more than just petty neighbors with too much time on their hands. They were organized, and that realization hit us both harder than any notice from them ever could. It wasn't long before they made their boldest move. One afternoon, Maria was out in the yard, cleaning up around the barn when she noticed something odd. A black SUV was parked at the end of our long driveway, with tinted windows that reflected nothing. It wasn't the usual HOA patrol. This one felt different, more deliberate, more professional. Maria stood still for a moment, studying the vehicle, sensing something dangerous. She had learned to trust her instincts over the years. It was just another ordinary day, but the air had shifted. Something was coming, and it wasn't going to be the same as all the other visits. The SUV didn't leave. Instead, a man got out tall and built, his posture stiff. He walked with purpose toward our property, and Maria didn't move a muscle. Her instincts told her to observe, wait, and listen. She stayed hidden in the shadows, watching as the man approached. He wasn't wearing a vest like the other enforcers. This one was dressed in black, tactical gear. He wasn't here for any simple compliance check. He was here for something more. The man didn't knock at the door like the others. He didn't try to approach me directly. He went straight to Maria. She hadn't seen him before, but there was something unnerving about the way he moved, the way he sized her up like a target. He knew who she was. He had been watching us, no doubt. Maria didn't panic. She knew better than that. She stood her ground, her hand casually resting on the edge of the barn as if she wasn't a retired Special Forces officer, just a wife, tending to her home. But the moment the man took another step toward her, she knew exactly what was coming. She wasn't just a target. This was something bigger. The man didn't speak, but his eyes said enough. He was here for her, to take her somewhere quiet, where no one would ask questions. And that's when the real danger hit home. This wasn't just about the HOA anymore. This wasn't about rules and regulations. They weren't just trying to enforce their vision of community. They were making a move to kidnap my wife. And they were willing to use whatever force necessary. Maria moved before he could make his next step. In a blur of motion, she spun around, using the barn structure to her advantage. The man hadn't expected it. He wasn't prepared for someone who had spent years in high-stress situations, who knew how to assess threats in a split second and respond faster than the enemy could think. She was already behind him, her hands locked around his wrist, disarming him with the precision of someone who had faced real danger before. But just as quickly, she realized that there were more of them. They hadn't come alone. They had brought backup. Within moments, 3 more men emerged from behind the barn, each one wearing the same dark gear, each one armed. They were ready to take her down. But Maria was ready too. Her training kicked in, and she went into autopilot mode, moving swiftly and decisively, knowing every move she made could be her last. She fought like she had been trained to, focused, calculating, controlled. She wasn't just defending herself. She was setting up a trap. It was a calculated risk, but one that would pay off if she could hold them off long enough. The men were larger, stronger, but they were unprepared for someone with Maria's skill set. She used her environment, staying just out of reach, making them underestimate her, all while looking for the right moment to strike. One of the men lunged forward, and she spun around, using his momentum to throw him off balance. Another tried to grab her from behind, but she ducked, her elbow catching him square in the jaw, sending him to the ground. But she knew she couldn't keep fighting forever. She needed to escape, to get back to me, to warn me before they took it too far. As she took down the last of the men standing, her eyes scanned the area for the next step. It wasn't over yet, and she wasn't naive enough to think they would just walk away. They had underestimated her once, but she wasn't going to let them make that mistake again. The one remaining man who had been lurking in the background made a sudden move, pulling out a taser. He aimed it directly at her chest, but Maria was faster. She ducked to the side, narrowly avoiding the electric charge that would have incapacitated her. She didn't hesitate. The man was down before he could react. But as he fell, Maria knew that this would only make them escalate. It wasn't just about the land. It wasn't about the property violations. It was about control, something much darker, much deeper than she had originally realized. And they had just learned what would happen when they messed with the wrong woman. She took a deep breath, preparing herself for the inevitable. This fight wasn't over. She knew the battle was only just beginning, and the stakes had just been raised. They were coming for her, coming for us, and this time, she wouldn't wait for them to make the first move. She'd take the fight to them, head on. But first, she needed to get to me. She had to warn me before it was too late. The truth was, the HOA had never been about rules. It had never been about community. It had been about something far more dangerous. A quiet invasion, a covert operation, and a network of power players who had only one goal in mind: control. And now, Maria was caught in the middle of it. The game had changed, and we were the targets. Maria's heart raced as she darted across the yard, her mind working faster than her legs could carry her. She wasn't running from them. She was running to me. Every instinct told her to get back to the house, to warn me, to prepare for whatever was coming next. She could hear the sounds of footsteps behind her, the unmistakable crunch of gravel under boots. But she didn't look back. She knew they were gaining on her, but she couldn't let them catch up. Not yet. The house was still a few hundred yards away, but every second counted. She was close enough to see the front porch, close enough to know that she had a few precious moments before the entire neighborhood was going to be engulfed in chaos. They were coming for us both now, not just her. They had thought they could take her quietly, but now they knew better. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The first step was getting inside. Maria could hear her own breath in her ears, the pounding of her heart louder than ever. She knew the layout of the house better than anyone, every escape route, every hiding place. She reached the porch, slipping inside the front door with practiced precision. She didn't stop to catch her breath. She didn't even look back. The only thing that mattered was getting to me. She had to warn me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, looking over some papers when the door slammed open. I didn't jump. I didn't even flinch. I'd been expecting something like this. Maria stood there, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with urgency. She didn't need to say anything. I could read the expression on her face. It wasn't just about the men outside anymore. It was about something far bigger, something neither of us could ignore. She was calm, but her words were rushed, clipped. They're not just after the property. This is bigger than that, she said, her voice steady despite the panic beneath the surface. They've got a plan, a network, and they're coming for us. I didn't hesitate. I knew we had to act fast. I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair, my mind racing as I quickly mapped out a plan. It was clear now. The HOA wasn't just a local nuisance. It was part of something more, a far-reaching operation with enough power to move quietly under the radar. They were coming for us, and they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. Maria and I both knew what that meant. They weren't just trying to force compliance. They were trying to control us, to erase us from the equation. And that wasn't something we could let happen. Not without a fight. Maria motioned toward the window, her eyes scanning the area. The SUV was still there, parked near the edge of the driveway. The men were getting closer. They had a clear objective, but they didn't know that we were ready. They didn't know that we had the upper hand now. Maria had already disabled their ability to track us by taking out their equipment when they tried to surround her. We were no longer playing defense. It was time to go on offense. I moved toward the back of the house, checking the motion sensors and cameras I'd set up over the years. Everything was working. Everything was in place. I turned to Maria, who was already getting her gear together. She had the look of someone who had been through this before. This wasn't the first time she'd been targeted, and it wouldn't be the last. But now, she was not only defending our home, she was defending our lives. I pulled out the emergency communications device I kept in a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. It wasn't something I liked to use often, but I knew it was time to contact our trusted allies. The last thing we needed was to be alone in this. I dialed the number, hoping that someone, anyone, would be able to help us. But I knew that this wasn't something they could just sweep under the rug. We were about to face an all-out assault, and I wasn't sure how much longer we could hold on. Maria's calm demeanor was unsettling. She moved like a shadow, never wasting a movement, her eyes always scanning for the next threat. I could see the old familiar focus in her face. This was her element, her domain. And for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we could turn the tide. But that hope quickly faded when I saw the shadow moving outside the front window. I froze. Maria didn't need to ask. She knew exactly what it meant. They were already here. The window shattered in an instant, the sound of glass splintering echoing through the house like a gunshot. They didn't knock this time. They didn't wait for an invitation. They were here to take us down. Maria was already moving quicker than I could process. She had her handgun out, moving toward the door with the fluid grace of someone who had seen the worst the world had to offer and survived it. She didn't hesitate. She didn't blink. She opened the door just wide enough for the barrel of her gun to slip through, taking out the first man before he even had time to react. I didn't watch her work. I couldn't afford to. I had to focus on the bigger picture. The sound of footsteps behind me confirmed what I already knew. They weren't just at the front door. They were inside. They had breached the perimeter. I rushed through the house, checking every window, every corner, every door. It was chaos. The battle had shifted from a quiet skirmish to an all-out war. But this wasn't the kind of war where you fired first and asked questions later. This was a game of survival. And as much as I hated it, it was one we had to play carefully. Every move had to be calculated. Every decision mattered. I made my way to the back of the house, grabbing the gear I had stashed under the floorboards. It wasn't just a backup plan, it was a lifeline. I pulled out the emergency firearms, checked the ammo, and prepared for the worst. It wasn't just about protecting our property anymore. It was about protecting our lives. And they were going to learn that they had picked the wrong house to raid. By the time I made it back to the front room, Maria was already engaged in the thick of it. She was quick, precise, methodical. They didn't stand a chance against her. The first group of men were down, but they were only the beginning. I could hear the sound of more cars pulling up, their tires crunching on the gravel. Reinforcements. They weren't going to stop until they had us. The air was thick with tension as I scanned the growing chaos. The reinforcements were coming fast, too fast. We had no time to waste. The house was starting to feel more like a trap, and every moment we spent here was another chance for them to tighten their grip. Maria and I had only one option: get out. We couldn't keep fighting from inside the house. We needed to take the fight to them, draw them into a place where we had control. I turned to Maria, who was already preparing to move. Her eyes were sharp, focused. She had the look of someone who had been here before, and it made my blood run cold. But also gave me a sliver of hope. We might just make it out of this. If we could make it to the perimeter, if we could get to the woods behind the house, we could disappear. The HOA might have power, but they didn't have the knowledge of this land like we did. I grabbed the last of our supplies, securing everything I could in a duffel bag. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved quickly, trying to keep the panic at bay. We had no time to think, we just had to move. We rushed toward the back door, but just as we stepped outside, I saw them, more figures moving toward the house. They were already closing in from all sides. They had learned quickly, adapting faster than I thought possible. They weren't just a ragtag group of wannabe enforcers. They were organized. They were military. We made it to the tree line, staying low, moving as quietly as possible. I could hear them behind us, shouting, calling orders to one another. They weren't far behind, but Maria had a plan. She always did. We set up the motion detectors around the perimeter, something we had prepared for situations like this, but never thought we'd actually need. With every step, we moved closer to the edge of the property, closer to the woods where we could lose them. It wasn't just about escaping anymore. It wasn't just about survival. We had something they didn't: knowledge. They had underestimated us. They thought they could walk in, take what they wanted, and walk away with no consequences. But they were wrong. We weren't just running away from them. We were setting them up for something bigger, something they wouldn't see coming. As we entered the woods, the weight of everything that had happened started to settle in. The sound of their voices grew faint, but it didn't ease the tension. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the leaves had me on edge. But Maria was calm, always calm, her instincts sharp as ever. She led the way, her eyes scanning the dark woods for any movement. We knew this land. We knew it better than anyone. But we also knew that the worst wasn't over. The HOA wasn't just going to forget about us. We had become a symbol, a target. We were on their list, and they weren't going to stop until they had us. The night stretched on as we moved deeper into the woods, further away from the house. But with every step, I knew we had made a critical mistake. We couldn't outrun them forever. They had the resources, they had the numbers, and now they had something else, a personal vendetta. The HOA wasn't going to back down, not until we were eliminated. Eventually, we came to a clearing where we stopped to catch our breath. But as we looked around, the quiet of the night felt different, unnatural. I could feel something in the air, a shift, a change. Then, a voice cracked the silence. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. "We know where you are." We both froze. They were already here. They had found us. They had tracked us this far, and they weren't stopping now. I turned to Maria, who looked just as ready as I felt. She had a look in her eyes that I had seen before. A look that said she was ready to take this fight all the way. We didn't have much time to react. They were close. They had us cornered. But we weren't done yet. Maria didn't hesitate. She activated the emergency signal she had set up earlier, a system I had helped her design in the past. Within moments, the woods around us lit up with bright flashes of light. We had rigged the area with motion-triggered spotlights. The ground beneath us rumbled as the lights flashed on, disorienting the approaching figures. The confusion on their faces was all we needed. We moved quickly, faster than they could react. But I knew we didn't have long. We couldn't keep this up for much longer. As we moved through the woods, the sounds of pursuit grew more distant. But I knew they wouldn't give up. We had to make it out of here. We had to expose them, to show the world what the HOA was really doing, what they were capable of. If we didn't act now, they would keep targeting other innocent people, breaking lives, destroying families. The system they had set up was far-reaching, and we couldn't let it continue. We finally made it to the edge of the woods, but the safety I had hoped for was fleeting. As we emerged into the open, we were met by headlights in the distance. The chase wasn't over, but it wasn't just about running anymore. It was about taking back control. This fight wasn't just ours. It was everyone who had been bullied, pushed around, and controlled by the false authority of people like Karen and her HOA. It was time to turn the tables. In that moment, I knew we had a chance to not just survive, but to expose them for the frauds they were. This wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning of something far bigger than we could have imagined. The fight was only just starting, and it was going to be one hell of a fight.